Order. Welcome to this meeting of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, and this is our first session in the State of Play inquiry, which takes up issues that may not fit into the wider inquiries that our committee is looking at, but is often about DCMS sectors that might have been slightly overlooked either by the department or by Parliament. And today we're looking at live comedy. We announced this session on the 1st of April, and thankfully only a handful of people thought it was an April Fool. The proposal today was actually made by the Live Comedy Association, so I'm really pleased that we're joined by Geoff Rowe, who's from the Live Comedy Association and the founder of the Leicester Comedy Festival, by Jessica Toomey, who is the managing director of the Frog and Bucket in Manchester and the founder of Fab Comedy Talent Agency, as well as a co-chair of the Live Comedy Association, and Dr. Sharon Lockyer, who is the director of the Centre for Comedy Research Studies at Brunel, University of London, and one of the authors of the UK Live Comedy Sector Survey, which upon which we've sort of based quite a lot of the evidence for this session. So welcome to you all. Before I begin, can I remind any members to declare an interest? If any of you've got a comedy past hiding in the closet, this is the point to whip it out, if you pardon the expression. But I'm going to start with the first question. And I really want to start by kind of drawing a picture of live comedy, because some people might think of the acts that they see on telly at Live at the Apollo or in local theatres and clubs. Others might actually think about artists that they see on TikTok and on their social media and YouTube. In reality, what does the live comedy industry look like? How do you describe it as a whole, Geoff?
I think, thank you very much for asking us to come today, by the way. I think it's great that you're looking at this subject. The live comedy sector has many different aspects to it, and the Live Comedy Association is very specifically looking at live comedy as opposed to TV or broadcast comedy. It's made up of a number of different people. I sometimes describe it as a cottage industry. It's a lot of enthusiasts, a lot of individuals, particularly in terms of comedy clubs as opposed to comedy venues that maybe pop up in pubs or restaurants or small rooms. Individuals who are enthusiasts. I think if you then look at kind of the next stage of the comedy industry, you'd look at agencies and managers, clubs and venues like Jessica's in Manchester, and then you've got the bigger theatres and arenas. But there's an awful lot of freelancers who work in the industry and in the sector. And in terms of talent and in terms of comedians, I think one of the great things about live comedy in the last 10 years or so is the diversity of voices which have come through. I think that has always been there. I've been involved in live comedy for 35 years. I think there's always been that, but I've seen a massive growth in that diversity in recent years, which I think is fantastic. But it's a largely unstructured sector. It's largely unsupported financially by government or by others. And it was once described to me as being an illegitimate sector. And I think what's interesting to me is there are examples over the years of other illegitimate sectors which have become legitimate. So, for example, pantomime, musical, variety. If you look back at the history of musical and variety in particular, it was never studied, it was never by academics and others. And then over time it did become more legitimate. So I hope that answers your question.
That's brilliant. Thank you for kicking us off like that. So when we talk about the workforce, then you talk about how there's quite a lot of freelancers. What would they be doing to earn a living? I mean, would they all be full-time in the world of comedy? Would some of them be working elsewhere in the creative industries or in a completely different part of the economy? How does that break down?
If you're looking at club nights, an awful lot of people do it part-time, and they would have other income from sometimes completely different sectors, so they'd have day jobs. And I think I mentioned they're enthusiasts of live comedy. So if you've got a gig every fortnight at your local pub as a promoter producer, you would do that as a part-time job, I suppose. I think some people who are involved in that bit of the sector wouldn't describe it as a job because the financial gain is sometimes very small. And it's not very stable. It's quite a risky endeavour, and I think that is increasing in the world that we live in today. The risks attached to it are multiple, and maybe we'll come on to that later.
Yeah. Okay. So Jessica, as someone who runs a venue as well as being involved in this sort of industry body, we talked about the fact that quite a lot of people have another job and then get involved in live comedy. So what would be the barriers of being able to access it as an opportunity and to being able to sort of stay in the sector?
So if you mean to get to full-time employment, what's weird about comedy is to become a pro comic probably takes longer than to become a pilot or a doctor. It's minimum 7 years of not really earning any money. Yeah. To get your wings. I do a comedy course. I describe it as almost like air miles. You have to have so many hours on stage before you can become pro. So it's just time and just building up. But I think that there are a lot of full-time jobs around comics. So for every comedian you see on stage, there's probably a manager, an agent. They'll have several agents. They might have a voiceover agent, a live work agent, a TV agent, crews even. Then you've got everything around the actual tickets. So you've got box office staff, you've got promoters, you've got bookers, you've got programmers, promoters, tour promoters. Because just even with live comedy, there's many strands to that. There's the mixed bill clubs, there's the festival hours, there's tours, there's festival tents and stages, there's podcasts now, so they may have a producer. A lot of comedians are now paying for social media managers. So when you're looking at it financially, don't just look at the comedian on the stage, you look at all the support that is needed. And there are a lot of professionals who do take a full-time living, but sadly it takes years to get to that stage, and you do need to top it up with a day job, or we've all done other jobs in the past, or websites, or they might be offering to poster designers for comedians, or looking after the websites, and you just slowly get more and more contacts until you've got a full-time salary.
But how do you kick off? So say, for example, James decides that, alongside his political career, he'd quite fancy dipping his toe in the world of live comedy. I mean, and he came to you. What would be the advice that you would give him for?
So if James, you're very welcome to come to the Frog and Bucket every Monday. So every Monday for 31 years we've had an open mic, and that's the beauty of comedies. It's so accessible. Anyone can just walk in off the street and give comedy a go. It's what John Bishop did one night as a travelling sales rep, pharmaceutical sales rep. He didn't know what to do in Manchester on a Monday and just walked into the Frog and got on stage. And that's how most people will start comedy. You've just got to get to an open mic and give it a go. And then, so comedy is very reliant on this lower league, maybe it's deemed as unprofessional, not money making, but it's vital for the stage time. These little gigs above pubs. They're probably not the face that you all see of comedy, but they are vital to allow to get to that level. Most comedy clubs that are worth the salt have an open mic. There's also comedy courses. I don't like to genderise, but I feel like women tend to prefer an academic route into comedy. Yeah. To get some sort of formal training and then the showcase. There is a new wave at the moment of people maybe coming through TikTok and finding an audience that way. It's rarer because you can't avoid the fact that you need stage time, but there are new channels now into comedy.
Thank you. And Sharon, what are the challenges caused by having a sector which is largely freelance?
Yeah, I think, as Jess was talking about earlier, in terms of it takes a long time to get to the pro stage. So in order to be financially stable during those times, you need to be able to obviously support yourself, which some groups and individuals will be able to do much more easily than others. So in terms of sort of the barriers, there's sort of economic barriers that not everybody will be able to perform in without being rewarded for that. So I think that's one of the sort of social barriers, which obviously links to the economic barriers as well. So I know like the industry is becoming more, the sector becoming more diverse, but there's still certain groups or individuals within society that struggle because they don't necessarily have the resources to be able to be performing for 5 or 7 years without being rewarded for that financially. So I think that's one of the sort of social barriers, that it's not a level playing field at all in terms of being accessible to all groups within society. So I think that's one of the issues around how the sort of the sector relies on the grassroots venues and performances, but then not necessarily financially supporting that until it becomes sort of, the well-known pro comedians. So and it's being able to survive that's 5 or 7 years before you become pro if you don't have a well-paid job or a background that allows you to do performances without the financial reward, really.
That's really helpful. So there's lots of opportunities for starting out and for open mics and for getting your toe in the water, but it's that when you decide that that's the career you want to move into, that's the sort of difficulty, is how you kind of build that career and sustain yourself financially over that period. Okay, yeah, Geoff.
It's interesting maybe that when I first set up Leicester Comedy Festival, I went to places that offered business development support, and none of them, so the local Chamber of Commerce and people like that, the closest we ever got was, you want to set up sort of something like a theatre? And the answer was, no, I don't want to set up a theatre, I want to set up a comedy festival. And there was no information available, there was no recognition that live comedy was a valid thing. Live theatre is a very valid, legitimate thing, but live comedy isn't. And for a long time people were asking me when I was going to get a proper job, and although that's amusing, it is a proper job. I had 30 years career building a comedy festival. We made a massive economic impact. The economic impact of live comedy across the UK is over £1 billion a year. It's hugely successful, but the building blocks and the framework in which we operate is not, I would suggest very strongly, is not recognised as being a valid, legitimate thing like other live performing arts are. And I think that's an issue for comedians as well as for producers, agents, promoters, festival organisers.
Thank you very much, James.
Thank you. Thanks for the offer of coming. My ego really wants to take you up on it, but I don't think I've got the jokes. You talked about the courses. Could you just explain a bit about what would be covered in the courses that you would come and study on comedy? But also, when you talk of the need for 5-7 years of work, of training, of hours on stage, that is learning the precision and craft of the form, or is it understanding to read the room and craft a joke?
You know more than you realise. Yeah, it's very much learn to adapt your set, because maybe a village hall is going to be very different to a city centre in Liverpool, and different demographics. and then some needing clean material or not. So it's very much just, it's almost getting a second, it's just instinctively knowing and looking at an audience and going, or knowing how to test where to take the level with how blue it is, or it's just that instinctive knowledge of audiences and how to play that room. And also just to write enough material to get to that level where you've got several 20-minute sets.
It's always struck me that with comedy, so a band doing 5 years may well still play the hit that they've played forever, and there's plenty of bands that pretty much trade on one hit still and are brought back and back and back and back. It doesn't seem to be that's sort of tolerated or indulged or even celebrated, and yet why does a joke not get retold by the same artist in the same way?
On the rare occasion it can, but I think that's the beauty of comedy, is it's so off the moment. It's addressing things that are happening politically or culturally. It's capturing a mood of a society. It's I think comedy has to be very much what's relevant in that moment. We've just archived all our old clips, and some of the material is aged so badly. So badly. And I think that's just because just comedy's addressing that moment in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Zoe, please.
Thank you. It's really lovely to meet you, and thank you for your time. Geoff, it was really interesting how you started to set out the fact that comedy is seen very differently to live theatre or other parts of the arts offering. And I find that really sad, but also very interesting. If government and the Arts Council recognise comedy as a specific art form, how do you think that could potentially impact the sector?
So I think it's not just government and Arts Council, and I've thought a lot about this and talked to a lot of colleagues about the Arts Council. It's somewhat the elephant in the room, really. But I think by writing live comedy into policies and strategies, which is how I interpret your question, would make a massive difference, because it would legitimise the sector to others. So we were talking earlier today about, when you're applying for funding bids, there are streams for theatre and live music increasingly, and visual arts, but not live comedy. It's not recognised. So I also think it's something about, and I don't think this isn't going to be a terribly articulate answer to your question, but there's something about recognition. I think if we went out onto the street outside and asked people about what Britain and the UK is known for worldwide, pretty quickly I think people would say our sense of humour and our comedy is known globally. Our TV programmes and increasingly our stand-ups tour internationally. But it's not given a platform, and I think by just doing that, by just writing it into policies and strategies, of course, yes, if the Arts Council recognised live comedy, I wouldn't say no to that. They have a funding stream for live music now. I don't see why they couldn't have one for live comedy. But I think it's about recognition, and it's about putting it on an equal platform to other performing arts, live performing arts, and validate it. I think I've spoken to numerous colleagues who've made funding bids, or bids to reduce business rates, or talking about reduction in VAT on tickets. All of these kind of things need to be addressed, and I will say that the Live Comedy Association is doing that. We've got really strong partnership with the Nighttime Industries Association, really strong partnership with the Music Venue Trust, and we're looking at different projects that we can maybe propose that would help the sector. But it's largely invisible, and maybe the last thing I'll say on this is also, I think, the British sense of humour is celebrated and is recognised, but live comedy, what might be called stand-up or character, is nowhere near that. So people talk about comedy on the radio, TV comedy, theatre, which is funny, but I think we are here today, and the Live Comedy Association exists to talk about stand-up, live performance comedy. So it's recognition. It's invisible largely at the moment when you're working on it day in, day out.
Yeah. And have you had much in the way of conversations with Arts Council and government, and what's those conversations been like? And maybe start with Jessica.
Not so much with an LCA head on, but they were our saviour during lockdown. So it was the first time we had been acknowledged and grants were open to us. And to be really positive, I don't think many comedy clubs would be around now if it wasn't for that. And every comedy club that did get that grant has grown substantially. Liverpool has just invested in a £7 million purpose-built comedy club. Glee, which is another great chain, they've just opened another venue in Leeds recently. The Stand, we're all around about the same age, we're all about 30 years old. The Stand are now moving to our larger venue in Glasgow, and just that acknowledgement and that funding, I think you'll have seen the greatest return ever on any sort of Arts Council funding. The way we converted that funding to real growth just proves that if we are supported, it's really beneficial for us.
Mm-hmm. And one other question I had was, it's really great that you've got the live comedy session, because I mean the fact that you exist, you've also been able to bring your message here today. How much of the industry is engaged with the Live Comedy Association?
We have around 1,800 members. It's growing. One of the issues we have is we don't know the total size of the sector. We've been talking to people like Sharon and others to try and research that. So we don't know how many comedians are performing on a weekly, monthly basis in the UK. There are gaps in the knowledge of the sector, but we have 1,800 members. It's relatively new organisation. It was set up during the pandemic. As Jessica said, the Cultural Renewal Fund was massively significant for the sector and was an enormous triumph for people working in the sector to get it. It was astonishing because that was the first time in 30 years that it was recognised. But since that, it's not recognised. I think the LCA has lots of work to do to represent the entire sector, and we're trying to do that with an incredibly small resource base. But the current directors have been in place for a couple of years and are trying to do more work around lobbying, advocacy, talking to yourselves and others about the role that live comedy can play. Because the other thing, just very briefly if I may, the other thing about live comedy is the economic impact is significant, but the social and the health and the well-being benefit is enormous. And the LCA wants to recognise and champion that as well as the economic benefit.
Lovely, thank you both.
Thanks, Eric. Sorry, yeah, go on. Could I just add to the really important point that Geoff made about recognition? I think if comedy was included in policy documents, public discussions, and there was an increasing recognition of the value of comedy, the economic value, the social value, in terms of academic research, it might then make it easier to have research projects funded by research councils. Because at the moment, because comedy sits outside of it and is excluded from the creative industries, in terms of academic funding, it's really hard to get funding for comedy-related research projects because there isn't that broader recognition within policy and public discussions. So in addition to benefiting the industry, I think it would also benefit the academic research, which obviously is closely linked to the industry, and it would benefit the industry as well in terms of a deeper understanding of maybe the size and the number of venues, so we can map out the industry in more detail and have a deeper understanding of what's quite a fragmented industry. because at the moment we sit outside of those streams and those opportunities for funding.
Thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you. Hi again. Jessica, next month we're returning to the work that the Music Venues Trust and grassroots music venues have done on the challenges that they're facing. In comparison, how are dedicated venues like yours faring compared to the music venues and the challenges that they've described so well?
Well, I don't think it's fair to compare us to music venues because they're getting the funding and the recognition, and they now get this arena levy. So for us, it doesn't make sense that one night live music's in an arena and then a pound from every ticket is getting fed back to grassroots, and then the next night Peter Kay is there and we don't get a pound. So I don't want to compare us like for like with music venues.
That's a voluntary levy though, right?
At the moment.
Yeah, at the moment.
I mean, I'm not expecting it to be other than voluntary, but is that not something the sector could be proposing for itself, given the voluntary nature
We
of...
are proposing it.
Right, okay.
We are proposing it. I think the biggest risk for any venue is actually keeping your bricks and mortar. The Frog and Bucket's only probably made 31 years because we own the freehold. But that, yeah, if we didn't have the freehold, we wouldn't exist. We would have been regenerated. But I think venues are about to go through the toughest phase now. With the increase of, we've really benefited from the reduction in rates, and now that's creeping back up. The wages. My electricity bill has probably been the biggest killer. It's gone from £1,600 a month to £2,800. All our costs this month have just shot up because of the minimum wage, and that gets passed on to the door firm, to all our suppliers, the breweries. So I imagine we're all going to experience quite a tough 3 months coming up, and it's just how we're going to weather that.
That see ticket prices go up then?
So we knew if we took a year view of all ticket prices going up, it wouldn't cover the increases. And I'm already the most expensive ticket in the UK. So I'm very nervous to push it too high because no one else has set that benchmark of charging that much.
How much is that?
So £26.50 on a Saturday night. I think the Comedy Store in London is probably on the same price. But I did increase tickets on January because I knew I needed those 3-4 months head start to try and get a bit of extra revenue to cover costs. But another difficulty as well is I took it on good conscience that I had to do another wage increase for the comics because it didn't seem fair that national minimum wage was going up. Freelancers don't benefit from any of these, rules on wages. So I've just had to put ACT's wages up as well. So absolutely everything's increased, and the ticket increase doesn't cover that. So I am going to see a loss. I'm going to see a reduction in profit this year for sure.
Is it to all the panel? Is it wrong then to assume that it's a relatively low cost medium to put on a comedy show compared to other entertainment?
No, I think comedy can be. I think theatres would really struggle at the moment without comedy because it can quite at short notice fill plugs in between their longer programmes, and it's fairly cheap for a theatre to put on compared to a big production. But when you say you look at a comedy club, it's just all the venue costs and the staff costs and health and safety and security and PAYE and and all of that. Don't forget, 20% is just gone immediately. Well, you obviously won't forget, but 20% immediately has gone to that. A lot of comics are working on a ticket split, so they're touring or they're working on a 70-30 ticket split, but they've immediately lost 20% of that, and very few comedians are VAT registered. So they get disproportionately less amount of money due to VAT.
Your point about the plugging a gap for multi-use venues, if that's increasing, does that then see a direct competition with a specialist venue like yourself? Are you forever now increasingly competing with those multi-use venues that perhaps come with different experiences for the comics as much as the audiences and the competition?
I think in business you're always in competition. You just got to up your game. But I also do feel like there's never been such a high demand for comedy. There's a shift in drinking where people don't want to just sit in a pub necessarily because they don't have as much money to spend on going out. If they are going out, they want a real quality night. So there's definitely trends in competitive drinking, not drinking competitively, but maybe axe throwing or golf, like golf. Drinking with activities or entertainment. I do feel like there's a bigger demand than ever for comedy.
Final question to the rest of the panel. Audience habits. How are they changing? What are your observations about the audience habits?
One of the things that we've talked about from the Live Comedy Association is working towards, this is not going to happen overnight, but working towards having an audience survey, because we want to know more about audiences' habits. I think from that point of view they are probably similar to music venues and other entertainment venues and options, largely in city centres. It's to do with transport costs, it's to do with a lack of public transport, it's to do with what's happening to our towns and city centres across the UK. Those factors, I think, are very similar to everybody else. I think one of the interesting things that we know from the LCA is the increase in what I will call rural comedy, although some people don't like that term, but there seems to be an increase in comedy clubs in villages and closer to where people are since the pandemic. And I think that's interesting. Why would you spend 30 quid on a taxi to go into Manchester, for example, when you could see something closer to home? So I think the answer is we don't know enough about audiences' behaviour. The only other thing I would add is I think people are generally across the board with live entertainment seeing things more as an annual treat rather than a regular thing. I mean, clubs like Jess's are doing really well, but whereas people might go out once a week, once every fortnight, for example, I think they're going to see shows, and they're probably across the UK going to see bigger arena shows as a treat rather than going to their local venue on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think that reflects research that I did with audiences. It was a while ago, but I think the pattern's probably the same in terms of there's audiences have a preference for smaller venues rather than the arena venues, which, yeah, obviously the ticket prices are much more expensive usually anyway, but the research that I've done with audiences shows a preference for the smaller venues, and also the importance of live comedy as a social event. So I think my research demonstrated that only 4% of audiences would go on their own. It's very much a social event with friends or with family. But equally, laughter is a social event. When we laugh together in a small venue or even in a large arena venue, there's that collective sense of community and experiencing something quite unique at that moment in time, and that was really important for audiences. I think that's probably, there isn't necessarily research to back this up, but my opinion would be that's become much more important after COVID, when we saw online comedy, which obviously was really important at that time, But without the sharing of the laughter, that was a very different experience. And I think the smaller venues allow that proximity and closeness that audiences like with live comedy as well.
Very good. Thank you very much, Damien.
Thank you. Clearly, comedy is about a lot more than economics, and we're going to come on to talk about social impact and health benefits. But just if we stick with the economics for a moment, Geoff, I think you mentioned a figure of £1 billion contribution to the UK economy each year. Sharon, I think from your work, I mean, first of all, is that a number you recognise? I'm sure you're not going to disagree with Geoff, but does that sound about right? And can you break it down a little bit for us? And could you also say, crucially, how that 1 billion could get to, say, 2 billion?
I agree with Geoff, because we're co-authors of the report that has the 1 billion figure in. And I thought it's as accurate as it can be, given that the sector is so fragmented. And I think what we show through the UK Live Comedy Sector Report is the diversity of how that £1 billion is dispersed across the sector. So there'll be large corporate comedy companies making millions of pounds, and equally there will be comedians who are averaging, in the reports, averaging sort of 26,000 a year. That's an average, though there'll be lots of comedians who are making much less than that. So it is really dispersed and fragmented. And I think it's really interesting that audiences want the smaller venues where there might not be such a large return for the comedians, but there are lots of comedians who are making lots of money. But equally, there's lots of comedians within the grassroots or the smaller venues that are making very, very small amounts of money, if money at all. So I think that is something else that I think we probably need more research on, in terms of broadening out the research so it's maybe a bit more targeted on the economics. But we've got a good idea of the value, the economic value, and I think it's an accurate reflection of the data that we have to hand. And I think the survey that figure is based on is a really good starting point for understanding the nuances and the challenges and the opportunities financially or economically, but also socially as well.
And in terms of the sort of composition, so obviously we were talking about ticket sales and ticket pricing a moment ago. Obviously that's part of it. There's also, I guess, drink sales. It's quite a big part of it. Perhaps food sales in some venues. What are the other sort of line items on revenue?
There's a lot, actually. So the Frog and Bucket runs comedy at the F1 Silverstone. They have a huge marquee there with comedy. There's comedy courses. We're still streaming.
Is that quite a big business, comedy courses?
We've done 40 courses now, with 12 students a course. Obviously, Salford University did the comedy degree as well. We're still streaming comedy. Not as much demand, but we do that directly, and we also do that with Next Up. So Next Up, like a subscription, a bit like Netflix, but just for comedy. So that's another income stream. There's corporates, awards hosting.
Is there much money being made out of YouTube ads and creator funds on TikTok and whatnot?
Patreon is a huge one at the moment. I know a podcast at the moment that's making over £50,000 a month on Patreon and Twitch. And there's I think at the moment comedians have become the new rock and roll stars. We don't have rock frontmen, and people are really attaching themselves to their favourite comics and going all the way with them, buying the merch, going on tour, listening to the podcasts, and just really buying into that person as a brand.
And then on the cost, and Jessica, you were talking a little bit about some of the cost increases at the moment. And I mean, you're in the position of being a profitable business and being able to reduce profit. I know it sounds like an odd thing, but at a wider level, and of course other hospitality businesses will be facing some of these same issues as well, and the same sort of nighttime economy in Manchester. I just want, Sharon, from your point of view, I mean, what will the impact of changes in, we talked about, national living wage, employment taxes, energy costs and so on. Do we expect that to have a macro level effect on the sector?
I think because they're so I wouldn't say detrimental, but they are a challenge for venues large and small, that there is potential that it minimises growth of the sector, because I think because there's so many comedians who are working at grassroots, but then if the economics are such that there isn't that growth opportunity, then I think as a society, we're restricting the opportunities for comedy to become bigger and more successful, and also allow other voices the opportunity to have space or their voice heard on stage.
So, in venues, and thinking particularly about operating businesses, do you expect to see an effect on employment, on price, is it possible that some venues will close because there's, if there's the same amount of money but all the prices have gone up, then it just doesn't go as far? What would be the effect? I
think effect on, just saying in terms of employment, if venues are having to cut costs, then one of the ways to do that is to reduce workforce. So that would be a direct detrimental impact due to the economics.
Yeah, Geoff.
Just to mention as well that there are numerous clubs and venues across the UK. I'll just give a plug for festivals as well. So Leicester Comedy Festival, which I set up a long time ago, the economic impact to the city of Leicester of that festival is in the region of £5 million each February, and that's from a 19-day festival. So I guess the reason for saying that is because when we're looking at the economics, there are issues in terms of the sector itself, but there are also the multiplier effect of clubs and festivals that they will have on locations across the UK. And I think, of course, I can't think of naming one in particular at the moment, but there are examples of a sort of Waitrose effect of where there's a thriving comedy club or venue or festival in a city. It does have an economic impact on the local community, and I think that's increasingly crucial as town centres, city centres are thinking about the viability going forwards. Festivals and venues, particularly of comedy, are incredibly powerful things economically.
And you were talking, a couple you mentioned, I think, Geoff, you in particular, about possible government support or incentives and cost reliefs that the sector might be looking for. Do we know of any other countries that do that? And are there any particular sort of success stories?
It's an interesting question. I don't know is my honest answer. In terms of live comedy, I suspect that other than Australia and possibly North America, the UK has the biggest and arguably best live comedy scene anywhere globally. So I would guess there isn't, but it's an interesting question.
Also, go on, Sharon.
I was just going to say, I think Canadian government support live comedy.
That's true.
What's that? This is from the Juste pour rire. Is that still going?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Canadian government very directly supports live comedy. And just go back to the sort of the economics, I suppose I think it's important to highlight the interlocking or interconnection of economics. So the survey report highlights how live comedy supports the charity sector. So over 80% of comedy organisations will run charity nights and support charities. So if there's an impact on the live comedy sector, that will impact other economic spheres as well, due to that interconnection of the economics within the industry and beyond the industry.
I'm also fascinated by the fact that you keep going back to the live comedy sector is distinct, and you're here to talk about the live comedy sector. I'm just interested to know, who would you see yourselves as most like? Are you sort of most like a sitcom actor, or most like a band playing in a pub, or most like someone delivering a serious monologue in a theatre? Who do you have the most affinity to?
I would suspect the experience and the information that we know about in terms of live music and grassroots music is, in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of the mechanics and the framework, if that's what you mean, I would say probably live music. Right. The difference, I think, and Jessica touched on this earlier on, and musicians argue with me about this, but if you are a live musician, you can practice your guitar in your bedroom for months and months and months and months, get really good at it, and then walk on stage and play your guitar. If you're a comedian, you have to go in front of an audience to find out whether it works. And that is a significant difference, I think, between the two. But I would say probably, in terms of the framework of how it works, probably grassroots music is probably the most similar.
Yeah, and I think with TV sitcom, that's a very different interaction that you have as an audience member than a live comedy gig. So I think, those would be quite very different production values and expectations from an audience perspective, definitely.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. Back to James.
Thanks. Female comedians have described sexism and even sexual assault as a peril of the job. What is the industry and specifically the Live Comedy Association doing to change this?
I wanted to touch on this before when you asked the issues of having so many freelancers, and it's a huge issue because there's no HR department. So the LCA did establish very early on that there needed to be some framework to report sexual harassment in the industry. And there has been a great thing called Geoff set up. So quite a few venues, not enough, but quite a few venues have committed to donating just £1 per ticket that goes to a centralised independent HR lady who deals with complaints independently. It's not enough money, it's massively underfunded, and it's heartbreaking if people knew actually how many reports they got every week.
How many reports does your venue get every week of sexual harassment or assault of female comics?
Not many at all, to be honest. But we've got a lot of policies. I've got a female venue manager, I've got a female programmer. We've got a lot of systems in place. It tends to be more at the entry level, either at the entry level or the top level, where there's a real power play. But it is sad that there is no funding or no legal requirement at the moment for that to be policed and managed. We are quite good as an industry, though, with fixing things. So it's great that the two comedians called Kiri Pritchard-McLean and Nina Gilligan have set off Get Off. It's just really sad that there's no way of them getting real funding, when it's such an essential service for our industry.
Yeah.
In terms, you asked specifically what is the LCA doing about it. I mean, I think to put this in some sort of context, the LCA is a very small, under-resourced organisation that is trying to advocate for live comedy across the board. So we're not able to fix everything that people want us to fix in terms of live comedy. But I think working with Get Off Live Comedy is good start. And through the survey, it came up as harassment came up of an industry, as an issue rather, not just with female comedians, I have to say, but predominantly with female comedians. And we all know the headlines that we've read about specific cases. But I think Jessica is right. I think there are a growing number of clubs and promoters and producers who are paying much more attention to it than they used to, and that's got to be a good thing. And the LCA will keep championing harassment as being something that we need to stop and stamp out, as they have done in other sectors. And I think that's something that we will continue to focus on going forwards.
Thanks, James. Have you had the opportunity to chat with CISA, the Creative Industries Independent Standards Organisation, that was set up specifically to look at issues of bullying, harassment, workplace intimidation, inappropriate sexual behaviour, all the the greatest hits of all these terrible things. That they are a great organisation to be able to sort of tap into their knowledge. They're just kicking off now.
Yeah, we haven't, but we're aware of what they're doing, and so that's something that we want to do, but we haven't done it so far.
Okay, thank you very much. Natasha.
Thank you so much for coming today. So I'm just going to talk a bit more about, because both Sharon and Geoff touched on this earlier, about social value in comedy and the health benefits and things like that. So just with that in mind, we've got organisations who've gone into prisons and done performances there, or there's a campaign called Health Crack, I think it's called, where it's about putting comedy on prescription and social prescribing that. Would you like to see comedy move into those spaces a bit more, and what support could be given to you to allow that to happen, if that's something you think that could be a bit of a growth industry for the comedy?
So comedians and people in live comedy have been working in health for more than 30 years that I've been involved in live comedy. So it's something that's been going on for an awful long time. And that's fantastic, and something that the Live Comedy Association is particularly interested in. We're interested in stand-up, and we think stand-up is great, but we also think when comedians and live comedy goes into prisons and health settings, et cetera, that's also really good. Interestingly, I think, from a comedian's point of view, it gives an economic benefit, it gives a diverse income stream, if they can do that. I also think, certainly the work that I've done over the years in terms of using comedy and live comedy in schools has a massive impact. A few years ago, I was successful in getting funding from the NHS to fund a kids' comedy festival to help kids get over the pandemic and start to build their self-esteem and their confidence. So I think the social role of comedy in those kind of settings, as I say, is a long-standing thing. There's organisations, there's one in particular that I can think of called Bright Sparks, who've been working in mental health and with mental health service users for probably 25, maybe more years.
But I suppose, just to what... And I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, there's a legacy here. It's been happening for a long time. It's not new. It's things that you're already doing. But what can be done to sort of formalise that arrangement a bit more, to provide a bit more structure and a bit more support to that, to have those links within communities?
So I feel a little bit like I'm repeating myself, but recognition and validation. Numerous organisations, I think I mentioned earlier on, have written funding bids where they talk about performance and they talk about individual practitioners, but they don't mention comedians or comedy. I think historically there was a fear from people involved in education and involved in health. What are the comedians going to say? Are they going to swear? Are they going to use inappropriate material? Well, myself and plenty of other people have a whole directory and database of comedians who've been doing this for a long time and know the rules of the game, right? So they're not going to be inappropriate in a school, for example, in terms of language I'm talking about. So validation and recognition, one of the things that comes up very often is the lack of evidence and academic research and impact studies. There's loads of it. It's just not recognised as being valid and important. So I think certainly in terms of the work that I and others have been doing in health, there's loads of evidence around the health benefits of comedy, both for the participants but also for the comedians themselves. So as I say, I think it's pretty simple. I think it's validation and recognition, and people talking more about the importance of comedy in those kind of settings, and it works. It doesn't work for everybody, but dance doesn't work for everybody either. And so I think it's pretty straightforward.
And so, Sharon, with that sort of thought of assuming you agree with the same thing about validation and recognition, what do you think that would look like in academic sort of circles, and how would what would make it easy for people making policy to sort of pick comedy as a legitimate way of helping with mental health issues or loneliness or any of those things?
I think obviously funding would help a huge amount in terms of designated or directed funding towards looking at the social impact of comedy in this moment in time, because as Geoff highlighted, there's lots of research that demonstrates the health benefits both of comedians or performers and also audiences. But in terms of the social and cultural and political context that we're operating in now, which is quite different from research that was published 20, 30 years ago, thinking about how has comedy changed, but also how do audiences engage with comedy within quite a different cultural context than 20, 30 years ago, and having research projects that are looking at how comedy is working now, I think would be really helpful for both the industry, but academic research and public discussions and policy makers more broadly.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Damien.
I just wanted to come back to something you were saying just then about your long list of comics that you could send into a school or a hospital and have no worries about them. And it strikes me that the brilliant thing about stand-up is you don't know what you're walking into. And also the terrible thing about stand-up is you don't know what you're walking into. We were, just before you all came in, we were exchanging anecdotes about those awkward moments that you sometimes have with family members, one generation up or one generation down. And I used to enjoy going to stand-up when I was a man about town in my 20s. I don't really now. I just wonder if there might be quite a big audience segment out there which could be tapped into if there was some way of distinguishing more when you see the poster or you see the sign above the door that you know which of those things you're walking into.
I think a good programmer though should on a mixed bill have a mix of artists to appeal to everyone and not.
But you wouldn't go. The mix doesn't work if you're bringing your mum or your child. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't want to book an act that would make someone feel that uncomfortable. I was trying not to put words into our panel's mouths, but one question might be, do you have some sort of
rating system?
There you go. She said it.
Safe to bring your mum to.
You've not met my mum.
If there are some comedians, I'm not going to name them, that you would not want to take your mum to, and I'm not going to put them on a mixed bill. They have their own night with their own brand under their podcast banner, and it's sold directly to their fan base. And I have to be mindful of where we advertise that, because I don't want someone to come and be upset or be offended. But at the same time, I've got to create a space where people can still push the barriers and not be muted. I think I've always took the view, Johnny Vegas says that comedy is a campfire, come and be warmed. I think you should be able to sit in a comedy club and not feel uneasy, not be fearful of what's going to be said, and to be able to bring multi-generational families. I think that's why everyone loves Peter Kay does so well. You can watch him with grandma, and that's the beauty of comedy if done right.
I think it's also something about the location. So I'm speaking from a festival perspective here, but we've done numerous shows, for example, in Leicester Cathedral. That attracts a very different audience to possibly from the Frog or the late night 11 o'clock show at the pub around the corner. I think I mentioned earlier, we've done gigs in hospitals, we've done all sorts of different shows in different locations. There's a whole thing I saw recently about a promoter who's doing shows that finish by 9 o'clock, because a lot of people, including myself as I get older, want to make sure you're at home before around that time. So I think there are things that happen where the entry level for live comedy is perhaps easier than going to a traditional environment that you might anticipate live comedy being in. But I think it is changing, very much so. I mean, the average age of the audience for Leicester Comedy Festival is around about 45, and people think it's much younger than that, but it isn't. So it depends, as I say, on the location and on the content. People sometimes say to me, "Oh, I tried going to a comedy show, it wasn't for me," and then they write it off in a way that if you go and watch a film at the cinema and you don't like it, you wouldn't write off going to see films, I don't think. I listened to some music and I didn't like it, so I'm never going to listen to music again. I think it's
You're right, people do.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
And certainly, to go back to the point that was made earlier about sort of social comedy and community comedy, that happens a lot. It happens in the corporate world. A business, we booked a comedian for our annual dinner, they were a disaster, we're never going to do that again. Well, frankly, you booked the wrong comedian. So I think it's an interesting point that you raise, and one that needs further conversations about.
Very good. Thank you very much. Can I thank all three of you for coming in and giving us evidence today and giving us a first glimpse into the world of live comedy. It's been really fascinating to meet you all. And what we're going to do now is we're going to let you all move back, and we're going to bring in our next panel, and we'll just suspend very briefly while we do that. Thank you very much. Order. I'd like now to welcome our second panel on live comedy, and we're joined by award-winning comedian Kate Cheka. We're joined by the founder and CEO of Funny Women, Lynne Parker, and turning the tables on him normally interviewing politicians, comedian and podcaster Matt Forde. You're all very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can I kick off the questions? You may have heard us talk to the previous panel about how people start off in their career in live comedy, and we were hearing about some of the open mic nights that some people use to try and hone their skills and gain the confidence. But I was really interested to know how you started, Kate. How did you get your break in live comedy? What brought you in and what's kept you going?
Well, I have a bit of an interesting story to get me in. I was trying to actually spite an ex-boyfriend, so I thought, what better way than to do stand-up comedy? But I started actually in Berlin, in Germany. I was living in Berlin, in Germany. That's where I did my master's degree. And I started there. There is an English language scene there that's quite busy actually and quite big, and so I began there, and it was much easier, I think, in a way to start in somewhere like Berlin because the rents were so much cheaper, and so I could afford things a lot more. I don't know if I would have actually been able to do it here, but there it was quite easy to begin comedy, so that's how.
And then what's kept you going?
People tell me I'm good at it, I think. People come to the shows. So I really love it. I think it's a really interesting way of expressing yourself. I think it's a really nice way of saying things you want to say about the world. Like, I studied politics at Cambridge, and originally I wanted to become a politician. That was my whole life plan. I was going to become an MP. And then I early mornings they just think are not for me. So it was a nice way of saying things about the world without maybe some of the other work that maybe an MBE would have to do.
Perfect. That's perfect. Matt, can I ask a question to you? How did you get started in your career?
I did my first gig when I was 16 at a pub in Nottingham and saw it really as a hobby, and then for many years would do it alongside working in politics as well as working in other areas. And it's a great education in the way society works and the things people want to listen to. And then you sort of build up, and it was interesting hearing the previous session. The reason it takes so long to become a comedian is you do 5 minutes at your local club, they might give you another 10 minutes. But you've got to also do 5 minutes at clubs all across the country, so you need the ability to be able to travel. For me, I was at a young age, so I was predominantly gigging in the East Midlands. But you're building your name in various different places at various different times. You're also having to build that material up, so it takes a while to get somewhere. But you feel like you're getting somewhere, you start to get a few paid gigs, and then you do the Edinburgh Festival, and then the thing that sustains you, obviously, is just the love of it. You need to be able to make a living doing it, otherwise it remains a hobby, and that's true for a lot of comedians. But once you're at a level where you can basically pack in the day job and become a professional comedian, it's a very proud moment in your life.
Mm. And Lynne, how do you see that the industry's changed since you started Funny Women? Have you seen a difference?
Well, I've run Funny Women for 23 years. I set it up because I was told women weren't funny, and there were no funny women, apparently, at that time. And I very much work at grassroots, so I identify... I'm not a comedian, I should just declare that, because everyone asks me why I do what I do. But I'm about the grassroots, so I'm all about how we support and bring people through in the industry. And Funny Women is a non-profit organisation, so we're all about investing back into the platform that we built. So we run the Funny Women Awards, which is aimed very specifically at supporting women to get into comedy. And as a direct answer to your question, I think that has impacted hugely on the amount of women you now see coming through. I mean, you see the successful people on television and on the radio because they've done their indentures around the circuit. They may get picked up by management companies, which I am not. We do not run a management company, so we are very much about presenting new talent to the industry. And I think we're not the only competition either. The Funny Women Awards is one of numerous competitions, some of which are run out of various festivals. There's the Edinburgh Festival Awards. All of those things add towards an industry that's pushing and developing itself forward. Although we're genderised, and I work specifically with women, to address that inequality and lack of balance that there was when I first went into working as a comedy. I had a very long career in journalism and then marketing and then PR, which led me into promoting comedy. And the world is slowly changing. I think I've seen a big difference in the last 10 years. I don't know if Kate would back me up in that, but I do think there are far more women now on the circuit than there ever were.
And what about the way that the art form is perceived by policymakers but also by the public? Has that changed? And you know how the Live Comedy Association has called for formal recognition of live comedy as an art form. Do you see that you know, is that the sense of direction? Is that where we're moving to? And do you see that there are barriers to that?
There are, but I have had some success. So we have had some Arts Council funding. We positioned it in a way that wasn't directly comedy. It was about health and well-being, and it was about the campaign that we got funded is called A Safe Place. It's badged under a much bigger project called the Glitter Project, which is all about supporting women in the industry. And when the previous session you talked about supporting women because of the dangers of being a woman out at night on your own in an industry, we got our funding because we built some of that into our work, but that's because we're a very female-specific brand. And I'm, immensely proud of the work that we've done. It's sadly coming to an end because the funding's running out, but we will get funding from elsewhere. So that's one level of success we've had. The other level of success we've had, which I think is also worth mentioning for how we can go from the ground up to get government on side, is within Medway, where Funny Women is based and I live, we've had a share of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund money. Medway decided to put it into supporting a lot of local businesses. We all had to pitch for it and apply. But we've had 2 years worth of funding for a very specific campaign called Comedy in the Community. So my thought is that maybe it starts at local government level.
Yeah.
If you can work with your local council, obviously Medway is a unitary council, so has a little bit more autonomy, and I think they're probably closer to their population, and they know people like me in the creative industries. But if there's a way of, I'd like to spin that model out, because I think it's really valuable, because what it's done is it's brought the local government, the local businesses, and local creative industries all together into one campaign. And I think that is something we could really push out as a way of almost like grassroots, taking comedy into the community and then building it up from there. I would say that there are lots of other examples. Leicester Comedy Festival, which Geoff launched, have done an amazing job working within their local government and community. I think I may have this wrong, but I'm sure they've had some support. But maybe that's where we should start.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, and lovely to meet you all sort of in this place. And we talk a lot on this committee about fair remuneration for creative artists, and we've already touched on it in the first session, and you've started to talk about it a bit just now. How difficult is it to make a living from comedy?
It's very difficult because you're starting unpaid. You've got to be prepared to work for years for free, alongside often a day job, and for many people obviously a family. You've got to travel the country late at night. If you don't have a car, it's very difficult, particularly given the state of the rail network in Britain in 2025, and similar for coaches. And that is emotionally difficult. That is, when you're first starting out, it doesn't always work, and it takes you a long time to perfect your craft, get up to enough material. And a lot of comedy clubs, the money has gone backwards. Since when I first started gigging, the money has got worse. So people face higher costs and less money for the work that they're doing. And then really, until the birth of TikTok and social media, the main way really to get discovered as a comedian, to really get a career on the whole, and this isn't true for everyone, was to really have a successful Edinburgh Festival. And performing at the Edinburgh Festival costs a fortune, and the single biggest cost is accommodation. The single biggest barrier to be able to perform and indeed visit the Edinburgh Festival is the exorbitant rents that landlords charge. And year after year it has gone up and up and up, and I think performers and audience members are prepared to pay a bit of a premium for staying in someone's house that they've had to vacate for a month. But it is growing exponentially year on year on year, and that is meaning that comedy at that level is becoming more elitist, because the only people that can afford to do the initial 10,000 hours anyway are privileged people, and then the only people that can afford to perform at Edinburgh and indeed visit Edinburgh are privileged people. The Edinburgh model is making it almost impossible to become a working class successful comedian in this country. And the lack of recognition from government, I should add, is part of that problem. And I know that the Minister in written answers has said that comedy is considered under theatre. That in itself, in my view, is effectively another form of institutional classism, is that they say, well, theatre is what this thing is, stand-up doesn't exist on its own terms, and that is just simply wrong. We're not theatre, we're our own art form, and that inability to decouple us from theatre is disproportionately punishing working class creative people.
So we're going to come back to Edinburgh Festival in a bit, but Kate, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's funny really, because I began in Berlin, and within a year in Berlin I was making my living off comedy, and my rent was very cheap, but I was living off it completely, and I don't quite understand how Germany, where the first language is obviously not English, has an English language scene which is able to sustain you. And lots of comedians in the English language scene in Germany do live off of it. And of course that's partly to do with cost of living being less there, but it also is like the gigs just pay more. I'm now sort of 6 years into the UK. I'm still doing gigs for like £20 here and there. Like, that's not really even covering me leaving the house. It's not really worth it. The only reason why I'm able to keep going is like I have a very sort of living setup where I live with my best friend's parents, who like very kindly said you can stay in the spare bedroom in London when you need to do your gigs, and like that's why I'm able to keep this going. But I wouldn't be able to keep this going without it. And the working class comedian thing is true. You really see fewer and fewer working class comedians coming up because there is no assistance. And I found a gig set list from 1991 on Mark Lamar's Twitter the other day, and the amount that the comedians are getting paid in 1991 for a basement pub in Islington is the same, if not more, than what we're getting paid like 34 years down the line, which is worrying, and I don't quite understand how that's happened. But yeah, I don't know how anyone really lives off it without other means as well.
Yeah. And so what forms of financial support would you like to see to make it better for communities and also to enable that inclusivity in the circuit?
I think because we just have to be honest about like how social media has kind of allowed like lots of arts to be seen for free. So a lot of people, especially of the younger generation, they don't go out to live comedy because they can get what they want in their phone. The algorithm feeds them who they like anyway. So that's kind of fine for them to get their enjoyment and whatever. So in that case, government funding is really important. I've just been in France and Belgium for some kind of conference actually, but I was there, and both France and Belgium do the Untermietens, which is like a funding for artists, which guarantees like a minimum per month. So I think in France it's €1,300 and in Belgium it's €1,900, which is if you're not making that amount a month, but you are still going to the gigs and you sign off the hours you are at the gigs and so on, then the French government will top it up to that amount, understanding that a living wage is necessary to keep the arts funded. And I do think somewhere like the UK, where actually one of our biggest exports is our arts and culture. We're not Germany, we don't have a huge manufacturing export. So I think it's really important, like British sitcoms are famous around the world, and to be able to write for British sitcoms, you need a good live comedy scene. Like, we're the same people that are writing the sitcoms are the same ones doing the live comedy.
Yeah. And Matt, do you want to add anything?
I totally agree. That's what you need. You need direct financial assistance to creatives in order to allow them to sustain it. Otherwise, the sort of comedy we see and get is going to become more and more elitist. It's made by people who went to nice schools and nice universities, and people from backgrounds like mine can't even... You could gig at your local comedy club and you could do it as a nice hobby. You would be prevented from doing it a career at a moment, and we are in danger, really. We've seen it in music, how elitist that has become. You see it in acting. The same is going to happen in comedy if we don't give direct financial assistance to people from all sorts of backgrounds, but at the moment, the people who are disproportionately punished are people from low incomes.
So going beyond the kind of direct assistance for artists and moving back to the Edinburgh Fringe conversation, what are your thoughts in terms of what can be done? What would you like to see as artists? And Lynne, I think there's also something for you to add.
Yes, we've all lost our shirt at the Edinburgh Fringe. I have done sort of everything there, from running crazily, setting up a venue, never to be done again, to literally going up there just to go and look at shows and review them and support artists like Matt and Kate. I just would like to say one point about the Edinburgh Fringe that came up in the last group, which was about who sees what, because Edinburgh Fringe, despite the expense of it and the commitment that we all have to make to be there, it is an amazing melting pot of talent for all audiences, and it is very well specified. So if you go through the Edinburgh Fringe programme, it tells you what age groups. It does itemise things into comedy, theatre, I don't know, performance. They have various categories. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. But it is, in essence, it's a fantastic platform, but it's flawed because of the cost of it. And it is very expensive for an act to go and be there on their own for 3 weeks and rent property and be there and do all sorts of other things, feed themselves, travel. So we've all been there. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've lost the thread of the question. Can you go back to...
Yeah, so the question was, what can we put in place? What would you like to see to support?
Yeah, so I, having had the experience of getting some funding, and just to be completely clear, the funding that we received as Funny Women did not go, it went to lots of different people. I had to spread it very thinly over quite a wide group and make sure that we still, we have to report back and we have to tell the Arts Council how we're using it. So I think I'd like to see that made easier, because those of us who do it as a non-profit endeavour, if it's a lot of homework and reporting to be done, that makes it very difficult and it puts people off. The other thing to remember is that a lot of people in the comedy world are neurodiverse. Filling in a form, completing lots of online, just doing the forms for Edinburgh Fringe would make you go blind. It's inappropriate, but it is a very difficult process to do and negotiate. So access is very difficult. It needs to be made easier. These funding applications are, I think the Arts Council one's about 90 pages, online pages. So if you struggle, if you have any kind of neurodiversity, that's a very hard thing to do. So I'd like to see that. I'd also like to see, and no one's mentioned it, there's a whole other middle structure in the world of comedy, which is management. And management companies sit between what you see on television and on tour and the grassroots start point for comedy. And they sit there in the middle, and they obviously go to places like Edinburgh Fringe, they come and see the Funny Women Awards and all the other competitions to choose the kind of talent they want to represent, and then they, quite rightly, take on and develop that talent and manage it. But actually, I don't know how much they then invest back into the grassroots side of the industry. So there's a lot of us working really hard, doing the circuit. There's people like me who are promoters, putting the whole world of comedy in front of these people. They take what they want from it, and then they are making money because they're selling their big acts to television. In terms of economy, you don't make lots of money out of some of this stuff. The big money is still in the touring and the commercial deals. It's a bit like sport. If you're a big name sports personality, you get lots of sponsorship deals. So big name artists and acts, that they get paid to do big advertising campaigns. But that's all run through their management companies. So I suppose one of the things that would be really helpful is to have more of a dialogue with them, and to get them more involved, we've had some success with broadcasters investing in us. We're currently working with BBC Studios, but that's an investment back from somebody in, a company in the industry that needs people like us to be developing comedy.
Yeah, thank you, Lynne. And Kate, and then Matt, anything to add in there?
Yeah, I think the Edinburgh one is really tricky. I was only able to do Edinburgh last summer because I had a friend who lived there who let me stay for free. I did the Free Fringe, which is like, smaller venues, but it was much harder than to get people in. I'd won Funny Women, so I had a little bit of an industry buzz that helped. I don't know how you regulate like something like Edinburgh, how you ask landlords to make things cheaper. I don't know how you do that in a privatized capitalist system. I think that's why I think we're both sort of pushing for some kind of individual funding, because I think comedians really will spend it using it to go into the industry. Like I was really I dropped out of school at 16 and then I was an EMA, education maintenance allowance teenager. That's the only reason I was able to get myself through college, was because I had these kinds of handouts. And I do actually think people really do want to make something of their lives, and when you do get those kind of handouts, you really will put all your energy into it. I know how deeply a lot of us feel about doing comedy and how much we adore it, which is why we do it in spite of having to really overwork ourselves and live quite difficult lives in lots of ways.
I totally agree, because the model of Edinburgh is basically that the artist takes all the risk. Yeah. That management companies and others will pay your upfront costs, but at the end of the month, if you haven't sold enough tickets, or even you could even have a sellout Edinburgh run and still lose money. And you have to be prepared to make that investment in yourself at the start of your career because you back yourself and you think you're onto something and you're prepared to take a loss, as many businesses do. And I think one of the things about comedians is we are fundamentally entrepreneurial. We back ourselves, we're trying to improve, we're effectively our own business that we're trying to grow, and we levy a lot of risk at the start of our career. Now, for a lot of people, that risk will never pay off. They will never really see the fruits of that labour, and they will stop and they will drift away. Now, some people maybe shouldn't have done comedy in the first place, but that's what's great about Edinburgh, is what is great about comedy is you can give it a go. It's up to you whether you choose to back yourself or not. But the scale of the costs now are so prohibitive, they are so scary for people that it puts them off doing it in the first place. And as a result, we are narrowing the pool of the people that will go on to be arena fillers and TV stars.
Thank you so much.
Could I just say what the cost... Like, a comedian is expected to lose about 10k for Edinburgh. For that 1 month, we'll expect to lose about 10 grand. And I have many friends that did lose 10 grand on Edinburgh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Natasha.
Thank you all for coming so much. I'm just picking up on that sort of... so when we're thinking about inequalities, we're thinking about class inequality, income inequality, race, gender. Do we think inequality is ingrained within comedy? Yes. Okay.
Next question.
Okay,
but yeah, I mean, I set up Funny Women in 2002, and I can remember distinctly having a conversation with a female comedian about 5 years in who said, "Oh, we soon won't need this anymore." And I thought, "No, that'd be great. You know, I can move on and do something else." I've had that same conversation every 5 years. And I would say at the moment, and I'm just talking about gender at the moment, at the moment there's been a big resurgence of misogyny repeated to me around the industry, which I am shocked by, because I thought, you know, after working in doing this for so long, that perhaps we had got rid of some of these taboos. You know, awful things like when we launched the awards in 23, we had a break last year. We'd done a programme with BBC Radio 4 on 20 years of Funny Women, and the whole agenda was hijacked by the Russell Brand case. And I was being asked to go on programmes like the Today programme to talk about the awards, and all people wanted to talk about was that. So that kind of publicity doesn't help. So I don't know if that has fueled the misogyny. We've obviously got the whole Andrew Tate thing. And if you look at the broader media landscape of what is happening on TikTok and Instagram and the kind of messaging that's going on out there in the world, that actually does reflect back on a cultural... it reflects on all culture, but particularly on comedy, which is satirical and reflecting society as we know it now. So whether that is what is happening, I don't know. I just find it quite distressing that I'm getting reports from women who are encountering some really unacceptable behaviour. And I don't have the resources or the woman power to deal with it, sadly. Generally, though, I do think that comedy is becoming more open to sort of working class, disability, and any kind of cultural diversity. I think there's been a really big effort in the industry to reflect that. And I would say, I think somebody said earlier about the last 10 years, it's become much more obvious and prevalent. But that is down to the broadcasters and that picking that up and putting that out there on public platforms. And also social media, which, you know, you can be your own channel. So if you're a working class comedian, you can get out there and you can talk about yourself and your life. So possibly that's feeding into it as well.
We'll sort of come back to that in a bit if you don't mind. But Kate, you've often spoken about having interest from the US when you won your Funny Woman Award.
Yes.
And you're thinking of performers like Jeannie Yashere and London Hughes who have gone out there and had really big careers.
Yeah.
Is that the only way a black woman can be a comedian? And if that is the case, what can the UK do to change its approach?
Unfortunately, I think yes, which is really bad right now because it's the last place I want to live in the world at the moment. But I do think a lot of black women do leave for the US because there is an inherent misogyny and racism embedded within this industry in this country. And I don't know quite how you get out of it, but if we do believe that comedy also has a benefit in a social terms in like hearing people's stories, I do think it really does do that, and it's good for society to hear different people's stories. Like we see an underrepresentation of not just people of colour in comedy and women of colour in comedy, but like trans comedians, queer comedians, non-binary comedians, like all of these people. I think what's interesting is I would actually say working class comedians used to be much more represented, and the costs have actually taken working class comedians out of comedy. I do think we are getting better about disabled comedians as well, but yeah, I think it's a weird one to think, oh, I have to leave to go to another country to really make it in my career, but it's a very well-trodden route for a lot of black creatives in this country, not just comedians. A lot of them do leave and go to the States because they can command bigger paychecks.
And then just, Lynne, you've spoken before, so I've got a quote, I'm going to quote you back to yourself, please forgive me, where you said that, I'm going to quote Jessica, who was on earlier, where she's talked about the women having to choose between taking sexist abuse from men and paying the rent, and misogyny will wrongly allow women to be labelled as awkward, difficult to work with, or problematic the minute they try to tackle any concerns that they have. So given the sort of that idea of inbuilt peril and waiting for bookers and promoters and acts sort of getting prevalence through those sort of things, sort of how can we make sure artists are treated fairly and treated safe and protected? And are we actually seeing maybe perhaps a democratisation of that with things like TikTok? Is there a way forward by using these social media platforms to have people to have their own platforms?
Well, when the pandemic, I saw a big increase. We did everything online in the pandemic. We didn't stop the awards. We carried on with them, but we did them online. I think Kate did them, and just actually saw a lot of women, specifically, obviously, coming through because it was a safe place for them to do it. So it was a safe, that we were all stuck at home. There were some huge successes that came out of that. We changed an award that we'd run for Best Show into a Content Creator Award to reflect that. And it was a fantastic place for women with, in fact, two people I can think of, both had kids, they were both at home, but they were creative and they came up with ideas and have become very successful, earning, six-figure incomes, have book deals. They work, I have to say, they do work really hard. It's not easy to be a content creator. You've got to be on it the whole time. They spend their lives walking around with their phones in their hands. It's not like going to a comedy club and getting on stage. What is interesting is that those people, and there are lots of examples, men and women, who are doing that, those people are now often going back into the live sector and touring and doing very well. One of the women I was talking about has done 2 tours, sold-out tours, UK and Australia, and is on tour again now. But she'd never done live stand-up until after the pandemic. Controversially, I know a lot of people in the industry are not as enthusiastic about that, because some people have been, treading the boards for a very long time, and then these newbies come along and they're selling out tours. But hey, life's like that, music industry's like that, and it's all part of the rich tapestry of how we can make comedy much more culturally significant and important.
And so obviously, to Matt, you've built an entire kind of industry for yourself, really, off the back of podcasting and social media. So how do you feel like it's helped you develop your audience, and how important do you think this is for new talent coming through?
Well, it's huge, and ultimately, people want to watch funny people, and they don't care where they find them. They don't care if they find them on their phone, on their laptop, or in their local comedy club, or through television. People really want to be entertained, and I think there's a real joy for an audience in finding the person that really makes them laugh, or the person they really want to go and see live, or more than one person. So I think social media is fantastic. Anything that makes it easier for comedians to get out there, it can only be a good thing. I think obviously the tension within the industry is it's one thing to be funny in one discipline, doing it as a stand-up comedian is something else. But a lot of those funny people who started on TikTok actually do develop into very talented comedians. And it's up to the audiences who they want to go and see at the end of the day. So I don't have an issue with that, really. As long as the show's good enough, I think that's the main thing. For me personally, I think comedy is a hugely empowering industry to be a part of. It can open so many different doors into television, into radio, into podcasts, into live work. And I think as a performer, you're working in an inherently unstable industry, and you have to try and get as many irons in the fire as you can. That doesn't suit everyone. People might not want to try and get a radio show or a podcast or express themselves in that way, but I think sometimes, and I say this as someone from a working class background who grew up in a single parent household on benefits, that I think sometimes there are genuine restrictions in the way, the costs of doing things, the fact that decision makers are predominantly from certain backgrounds and go to school and university with the people that they then commission television shows for and buy. But equally, in life, I think the danger is you assume a level of restriction on yourself, and what is so great about being a comedian is it empowers you, if you can get a foothold, to actually really back yourself. And sometimes actually great working class comedians do emerge. Great, some of the best sitcoms in the history of this country, Only Fools and Horses, People Just Do Nothing. There are so many great sitcoms about working class culture. So actually it's not impossible. It's just that it is a harder route, but I think you shouldn't be put off by it. If you back yourself and you're prepared to take that level of risk, you can still get somewhere.
And is there sort of an opportunity, because we've seen the decline of public service broadcasting and traditional telly, and that being a big platform for people to sort of launch their careers. Do you think there's an opportunity here for social media providers to perhaps use some of their social capital and value to develop working class talent, for example, with their platforms giving out free workshops on how to kind of build their audiences?
I totally agree. And if you watch some YouTube shows, they look like telly shows. They're really impressive, some of the production values. But I think the problem for television regarding, the sort of specific area of comedy that I'm often working in, which is satire, is I think commissioners have become too timid at commissioning topical comedy and topical comedy that has a bit of bite. I think the BBC and Channel 4 and others are wary of, certainly I think under the last government, were wary of annoying a government that at the time was said it was going to privatise Channel 4, and I think the BBC have fallen into that problem as well. You see less new topical comedy on telly. I think there is a huge desire for satirical comedy that really packs a punch, not just at politicians and government, but at other powerful people as we perceive them. And I think online is where people are going with that now. I mean, I worked on Spitting Image. We did that as a West End show. The desire for that sort of comedy is overwhelming, and yet it's not reflected on television.
Just on, thank you, copyright. There's an enormous debate going on at the moment about the rise of AI and its threat posed to intellectual property. As people that create content and then share it with the world, there must be a bit of an honour amongst comedians not to rip each other's jokes off, although...
Amongst most, yeah. Amongst the odd one, well, yeah.
What does the copyright concern for creatives as yourself strike you as? Is it a very real threat, do you think?
It's an existential threat. The only thing you've got... I mean, comedy is so different, is you write your own stuff, and you take real pride, and it takes so long, or it did for me anyway, to write a really good 20 minutes or a really good hour, and the hard work that goes in to writing a joke can take ages, and a routine really is never fully finished. It can always be perfected. There's always another line that will improve it. And on occasion where you've had material stolen by someone else, it's an infuriating thing to go through. To think then that there is now an industry that is specifically designed, that is basically, the whole point of AI is effectively, a lot of it is to harvest your creative output, to take all those years of hard work and say, well, actually, anyone can just have this. Because they're going to scrape that data from somewhere, and it's going to be from the people who put years and years of hard work and labour into that. And it threatens us as an industry. It threatens live venues, it threatens the hospitality sector, it is a major threat to the UK economy if there are not guardrails in place to prevent effectively the wholesale theft of intellectual property. And I understand why the government wants Britain to lead in AI, and of course we all do, but if that is at the expense of other industries like ours, the net effect of it will be appalling.
I was going to say it's a real wild west at the moment. I hosted a panel last night with women in journalism and an organisation, a company called Russell's, and the question about AI came up. I also learnt a new term last night, which was scraping, which you used. And that's it. And even our legal person on the panel was exactly as Matt says. It is absolutely, it is not regulated. Your material is out there, and there are, whatever they are, bots scraping your material. And because AI depends on that, because it's taking that and turning it into making it accessible for other people. And that's not just in comedy, that's right across all the creative arts, all of it. Women in journalism, we were journalists talking about it last night, music industry. I'm not an expert, I just find it really frightening.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was also really reticent to be like a social media comedian because I didn't want to put my work out there. I'd worked really hard at it and I want people to come and see it live, and it's a really different experience live than it is on social media, actually, which is like the beauty of live comedy. And then I had one viral video and it's incredibly addictive, and immediately it set off a trend and I saw suddenly people doing almost the identical video with no credit to me of like the format I used and stuff. And it's very, very frustrating because it's your art and it's being stolen for you. And I think why we're sort of so pushing towards live comedy is it's bad for the UK if everyone's just sat at home watching these videos, and who makes money in the end is these people who own these huge tech giants, these billionaires. They're the people fundamentally profiting off of your art that you're putting out in the world for free, in the hope that somehow it will like inspire people enough to buy live tickets to your shows. And I think that's why we're really it is a different experience live completely than it is on social media. And I think it's really important for also the economy to get people out of the house. It's not just ticket sales, but it's the drinks that people buy, it's the taxis people take to get there, or the buses or whatever. It's all stuff that makes social cohesion better. If we're all going out and sitting in a room, I can tell you when you've got a room united, like 100 people united with you, it's so different to being alone watching someone doing a joke, and how good it is for society for that to happen. And I think, yeah, the technology thing is a real double-edged sword because it is unbelievably, of course, validating and addictive. But in the end, I think we would all say live comedy is better and way more valuable. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Damien.
Thank you very much, Scarlett. So in this debate about opt-in, opt-out on AI and copyright, it seems to apply sort of different, or could apply differently in different sectors. And when you hear the opt-in, opt-out, what it sounds like is people having a view about whether their material should be used or they can stop it being used. But actually in some sense, talk to some people in music, for example, it doesn't really sound like they really want to stop it being used. They just want to make sure they can get some cash coming out of it. Of course, in music, there are mechanisms through which you can do that, through the performing rights system and all the rest of it. I guess in comedy, there probably just isn't. But I just wonder if your thoughts on whether in comedy specifically, and given the work that can go into a single gag, actually what you really want to do is to stop that material being used like a tool rather than making sure there's some artist remuneration.
Well, you do get paid writing work. So artists are prepared to write for other comedians on radio shows, on telly shows. So that's not unusual. That
I'm talking about the scraping.
Yes, I think unless you were paid the sorts of rates that you should be paid for, I mean, the reality is you would be undercut for it. I can't imagine many people, unless they were very new and at the start of their career, where they were just looking to make...
Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you. Sorry, I think I misunderstood what you said.
Yeah.
So you're saying through the artist's remuneration thing, if you're writing material for somebody else, that same system could be used for remuneration for having your material used by AI, even if you can't say, I produced this, it appeared there.
There are two systems, because you're commissioned as a writer to work on a show for X amount of days. So you get paid for the material you generate on that show on those days. My point is really that people are prepared to give their material to other people for a fee because you work as a writer on a topical comedy show or wherever. So as a principle, I don't think people are against giving their jokes to someone else because they're being paid in that specific role. But I think in terms of the use of AI, it would really only be people, I think, at the start of their career who are looking, when you're desperate to monetize it in any way you can, that would be more likely to take any sort of deal that I presume actually would be a terrible deal. Because if you're paying people the sort of day rate that people should get for radio and comedy writing, the costs then to the AI companies are far too large.
Can I just jump in on that? Sorry to interrupt. So the entertainment newsletter Pop Bitch last week noted that the launch of the UK version of Saturday Night Live was inviting writers to send samples of their work for free. I don't know if any of you saw that. I mean, on one hand, you know, the trying to bring, I know it's been tried before, but trying to bring Saturday Night Live over to the UK potentially could be a great opportunity for many artists wanting to try and launch their comedy career to a wider audience. But, you know, how do you feel about, you know, it's almost as, you know, we talk about AI stealing people's work, but how do you feel about writers being unpaid for their work?
I think if you're auditioning, that's different. And that's basically a writer's audition, is to send some example material in order to then get paid work. I think that is a different principle. But I'm really excited that SNL is coming to the UK. I think it's a very good thing. I think we need more topical comedy on telly. We need more sketch on telly. I cannot believe you go to the Edinburgh Festival, you see amazing sketch shows that you don't get that. It's a real breeding ground for talent. It's a different discipline to individual stand-up, and there should be more of it on telly. But I think SNL in itself isn't going to dramatically change the culture here. I think it's always positive when shows try and break out of... There are people that write on lots of comedy shows, and they are very, very talented people. Part of the problem is, though, you end up with a group of people that all write on the same shows, and then because there aren't that many shows that employ those writers, they all start to feel quite similar. Any new show that comes along and tries to, as well as using established talent that can deliver, which is the crucial thing, the thing needs to be funny, but that also tries to get new writers in, I think is a really positive thing. So if SNL is serious about trying to get new writers in, give new people a break, I really welcome it.
Okay.
I do feel like I would love to see a paid system for submitting stuff, because even if you are auditioning for something, it is still going, like, you know, not maybe physically going somewhere, but it is still doing work. Like, showing up to something and giving your thoughts on something is doing work. So I would love to see remuneration for it. I think it's just been such an unregulated industry for so long. We've learned to accept these terms, and there are some people that just can afford to accept the terms, and so therefore do. And the rest of us just have to deal with that, because it's also competitive. And if some people can deal with it, then we all have to deal with it, unfortunately. But I do agree in the principle that, like, if I'm submitting to something, if I'm speaking at something, I would expect to be remunerated for my time. I'm a freelancer. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm sorry, Damien, I completely interrupted you there.
Back to AI. I mean, how big a competitive threat ultimately is this? Is AI actually going to be funny on purpose?
It might be, but not yet. What we find out...
How long have we got?
I don't know. That's the problem. And we've noticed it really can't yet write or tell a joke in the way that a comedian can on stage. But I do feel a bit anxious about it, because it definitely can do poetry all right, and it's starting to be able to write scripts okay. And I feel like it's going to be a little bit like that poem that's like, first they came for the poets and they said nothing, and then they came for the script writers and they said nothing, and finally it'll come for the comedians and there'll be no one to defend us because no one else cares about stand-up comedy like we do. But it is going to come for us eventually, I think. It just can't yet. But then also there's something about the experience of watching a person. Would you want to go out and watch a computer tell jokes? Chicken said over there. No.
I mean, I guess that is the point, isn't it? It's somehow, as with music, it's trying to make the potentially live experiences actually become more valuable, not less, in a world where so much stuff is an artifice and is coming to you. The experience of going to it and interacting with other people, and particularly with comedy, you know, as with music, the roar of the crowd, or with sport, the roar of the crowd. Actually, in comedy, the laughter around you is...
I totally agree, and I think as human beings, the live experience is unreplicable. But what it does mean is, when you are live and you tell those jokes, they may have heard that on an app. Because you tell that joke and they go, I've heard that before, he's nicked that off someone. And actually they'd have heard it on an AI app, and then you are robbed of that Jokes are the creation and the release of tension, the element of surprise, and that's why comedy is different to music. Is music comforts people in a completely different way. With comedy, the first time you hear the joke is always the funniest. And if that joke has been told through some sort of app or AI or whatever it is, some sort of bot, the live experience is absolutely tainted by that.
And do you want to go on and talk about the health impact?
I can, yes. Let's do that. It's about the health impact. I mean, particularly, so social prescribing is a big thing. I mean, I think probably all of us in our constituencies is something that comes up quite a lot more. People see great potential for it. There's no kind of national framework or coordination to it. It's probably not the first thing that people think about. The GP surgery, it's probably not the first thing the practice manager would think about. Comedy. But what do you think are the sort of most productive or most promising applications for your art form in helping the health of the nation?
I'm not in the comedy on prescription area specifically.
No.
I'm more on the general community side of it, but there are big parallels. And working on comedy in the community as a project has really helped us see within the community the kind of health and social aspects of bringing comedy into the workplace or working with specific groups. So we've worked with elderly groups and we've worked with all-female groups, obviously, mixed groups. And just seeing people interacting using comedy techniques through workshops and that has been quite groundbreaking. So there's the social aspect of it, and then there is the absolute specific social prescribing. And within Kent, there is a big social prescribing lobby. I'm part of it. I think there's a meeting tomorrow where lots of different practitioners from the creative arts and the health sector get together and explore ideas. And there is a little bit of funding, I believe, for various elements of that. So I think it's important. Then there are, as Geoff said earlier, lots of comedians who work very much, they might go and work in prisons or go and entertain people in hospitals. Everyone knows the benefits of that. It's very well documented. Patch Adams, the famous, portrayed by late great Robin Williams. We've got lots of evidence to support it, and I think it should be on a separate agenda. There is a whole project called Comedy on Prescription, which is being run, interestingly, through a tech entrepreneur who's got a lot to say about AI, much better than probably us to talk about it. But there is a platform called Crack, and they are fueling a lot of the research into that, and we've had discussions in government at an informal level, and there is definitely a growing movement for that. So I think it's really valid, and I don't know how many actual social prescribing programs are active in this country. I'd like to know, actually. I think it'd be really interesting if doctors are actually sending people to comedy clubs. That would be great. It would be.
Do you
really
think that is that the way it would manifest? Is basically go to the comedy store, here's a ticket, or is it something else?
I don't know. I think it's a bit of everything, really. Yeah. Workshops. We all know that laughter is the best medicine.
Certainly it did wonders for my mental health, because I suffer with depression and so on, and doing comedy, I always sort of said, well, if I don't make it a comedy, at least I'm going out for an evening and laughing. And I think there's also a thing about certain spaces for certain people. I help comedian Kima Bob with her Femmes of Colour comedy club, which is for femmes, trans, non-binary, queer comedians of colour. And to be in those spaces where I think people do feel very safe and included, and to see themselves represented, I think is really, really helpful in societies, because a lot of living in the world as it is right now is really traumatizing, and for an hour or two you get this release, and then I really do believe it does help you then go about the day. I feel I've certainly had audience members come up to me afterwards and been profusely thankful, or say things like, this is really, I was feeling really bad today and you've really made me feel better. I don't know how you make that into a policy per se, but I do think if you can do something that really promotes our industry, people will find it on their own and they would really come to it.
I think that emphasis on live is crucial, because I always thought comedy was quite disposable compared to other art forms, and I completely underestimated really the profound impact that I think being anything immersive, whether it's a football match, a theatre show, a comedy show, where you switch off from everything else in your life and you are completely immersed in that world, is magical. And I've really come to see the value of comedy as actually even more distinct in that sphere, because there is something about laughter that is so good for you and that really does last. I don't think it does leave you at the door when you leave the comedy club or the theatre. That people have very difficult lives in many different ways, and everyone has stresses and troubles, and going to watch a comedy club where you totally switch off, you see all these different funny people who make you laugh in different ways, there is something that will last beyond the night there, and that only comedy can give people. And I think it is such a special art form for the impact that it has on people's lives. And it brings me back to the point, it's infuriating that we are not recognised.
Yeah, and without a live scene, which is really the base, you don't have that. I mean, you know, comedy is in everything, right across the arts. It's in the media, it's in film, it's in books. I mean, you know, Shakespeare wrote brilliant comedies and brilliant tragedies. You can't have one without the other. So when you talk about comedy not being part of the arts, it is absolutely ridiculous. You know, Chaucer wrote some of the funniest stuff, you know, in the 12th century, I think it was, my English A-level. You know, and everyone, Samuel Pepys wrote very funny diaries. We have now, it's used, you know, diarists use humour. A good film, it might be an action movie, but it will always have a funny bit in it. So to think that comedy is sort of somehow sidelined as not an art form, to me, it's just completely ridiculous.
Yeah, I just think it's such a British thing. Like, I don't know, like, it's ironic that I started comedy in Germany. Like, I think I've lived in lots of places. I've lived in India, I've lived in Argentina. Like, I did a very interesting master's, but everywhere I went, people were like, "Wow, you were really fun." Like, there is something about the British we are very inherently funny people and very naturally funny. And I think comedy is really something that's like culturally so important to this country and really something that we've got. And I kind of wonder in a way that it's not more of our big selling kind of point as a country internationally, because I do think we do it better than like lots of nations, and really it's something that feels very British.
I think our biggest comedy export is Mr. Bean.
Yeah,
which is visual,
which is everywhere around the world. You know, the most watched TV show in the world.
Very good, thank you very much. Well, that brings us pretty much to the end of this session. So, as you probably know, we kicked off this round of what we're calling state of play sessions. They're one-off, very different to the normal select committee way of going about things, where you normally spend months looking in depth at an issue. We've decided to do these kind of one-off deep dives into a series, and this is the first. So, thank you for being our lovely guinea pigs for the day. But I guess what I want to wrap up by asking you is, after this we're going to put our heads together and figure out what we're going to recommend to the government and others that we've gleaned from chatting to you and the panel before you. If you were in our shoes, what would be your recommendation to the government or any other arts council or any other body that you think would meaningfully change the dial for the live comedy industry?
I think it's direct funding, to be honest, really. And I understand why the Arts Council maybe don't want their branding on every comedian's poster, because comedy can be incredibly controversial. But some way that there could be some direct funding to step in, because the private, it's just not working with all the competition from the apps and all of this stuff. It's just not floating right now, and I think with the venues struggling and so on, I think direct funding would be
that's to the individual.
Yeah. I would say.
I'd like to pick up on what I said earlier about my experience of working locally, and because that ties in really well with grassroots and live, and there should be a provision by government, as we've had through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, to come together with people in their local areas and look at how they can bring that comedy in line with supporting music or folk festivals or whatever. There's lots of other things that local councils support, but they wouldn't necessarily put their funding into a comedy project. So I think that might be a really good way of devolving it, and that would fit very well with the Live Comedy Association as well, because they're representing people all across the country.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, the direct funding, but also it's crucial that the government, the department, the Arts Council recognise stand-up as its own individual industry. Yeah. Otherwise we will forever be having to justify ourselves and compete against other sectors. I just think it's ludicrous that in 2025 stand-up comedy is not recognised, and this is, people have been lobbying about this for a very long time, so I think that would solve a lot of the other problems, is just having that recognition of our industry.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for being so brave to be the first ones to do our State of Play series of inquiries. We're really grateful for all your time and your evidence today. And if you think of anything else that you feel that we should take into consideration after you've left, please do drop us a line, because we'll be coming together quite quickly as a committee to work out what we think are going to be the key recommendations. But we're really grateful for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.